Welcome to Archive West Texas. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson. We're joined today by our producer, the man who makes this show happen, Thomas Dye. We're pleased to welcome this afternoon Henry Martinez as our guest. Henry's the owner of P&R Surge, a company which is focused on agricultural irrigation efficiency. Henry was a longtime friend and co-worker of Robert Bruno Jr. Robert Bruno was an artist, a teacher, an inventor, and a businessman. His sculptures are featured prominently on Texas Tech's campus. His inventions have saved millions of gallons of water over the decades, and he designed and built one of the most unique structures in Lubbock County, the Steel House out at Ransom Canyon. Henry, thanks for joining us today to provide perspective into the life of your friend and mentor, Robert Bruno Jr. So Henry, tell us how you got to know Robert Bruno.
Well, Gordon, I am very honored to have been around Robert for about 22 years that I was around him. Robert was born in Los Angeles, California. He spent some of his life in Mexico City, and then he went on to Dominican College in Racine, and then he graduated out of the University of Notre Dame.
Then after that, he came here. He came to Lubbock originally to teach design and art at the School of Architecture at Tech.
That is correct, Gordon. He went on to Texas Tech as a professor for sculpture and drawing. And while he was there, he designed a small sculpture that right now is in front of the architectural department, the College of Architecture department at Texas Tech. And it's a small sculpture that I think was the beginning of his still house that eventually has been well known worldwide. And it's something that he left along with the still house. It's an 18-foot tall.
You say it's small, but that's actually pretty good
well,
size. In fact, I've seen photos and videos of the truck moving it onto the campus.
Yes, that was a very, very astronomical venture to have moved that structure. It was 18-foot tall, 21,000 pounds of steel, and they asked me if I had any way of getting with the family, which is his daughter and his mom, to see if maybe they could, purchase it and put it somewhere more useful, which that's what we entailed doing. This was moved to the architectural department, College of Architecture department of Texas Tech.
Where did he build the sculpture?
Now, the small sculpture is interesting because I think it was built in and around Texas Tech, okay? But then somehow or the other, I don't know the exact details, they told him that it had to go. So he moved it, and when he moved it to on Martin Luther King by Slayton Highway. It was in a cotton field for all the time that I worked with him up until when he passed away. That's how they found it, because I knew where it was at over the years, and they asked me if I could get with the family and see if they could put it at the Texas Tech.
So they made him take it off campus originally, and
yes,
then years later they wanted to bring it back and display it.
That's what I always found so interesting, Gordon, is that first they basically told him he had to move it, and then they ended up finding out after the still house, I think, the importance of it maybe being at the Texas Tech
that makes sense.
Architect Museum. So we made arrangements to get it over there, and that was a pretty good task. But I've been very happy and proud and honored to have been a part of that. The sculpture, I remember him saying, not to me, but in a book, he said, if I can sit under something like this, what's to stop me from making something and living inside like this? And that's the idea of the still house. And then, of course, in 1974, he started the still house. The beginning There was some negativity with the neighborhood, the neighbors and everything. They saw it as an eyesore, and he had a little bit of a problem with that because they didn't have any idea what this was going to be. There's no per se schematic of this still house. I do have a preliminary drawing of what he needed for the city council or the city code or whatever you want to call that. In other words, he needed to have something for them to approve him building this house. And it was just a plan, but it was nowhere near what he didn't know what it was going to be like. He just had an idea. He was a sculptor and an artist, so it was just like a painting. You're not going to know what the painting is until you finish the painting. That's what I always describe it as.
Yeah, but the materials that he was working with, he's dealing with tons of steel, and I basically built this by himself. I mean, I've seen pictures of him suspended in some kind of a rope harness with a welding torch in one hand and a hood over his face. I have no idea how a single individual takes that heavy material and welds it into the structure.
Well, you're right. This is nothing but 1/4 inch and by 16ths, 110 tons of steel, and I would say it's 2,200 space of feet. I'm not going to say square feet because there's nothing square about it. Okay, but yeah, he made it was like a chair with a hydraulic boom on it, and it would swivel that chair around the house. It was attached to the top of the house, and that's how he would move around it and between clamps and vice grips and magnets, he would do the curvature, clamp it down, and then just weld it. And what was really interesting is that he found metal to be able to shape and form with grinder or the mallet or to beat it into place. And if there was a mistake, you could cut it out and add on to it. And it was a material that you could form as you go, per se. He found it as it having a life. He never had the intentions of painting it. The organic, the humidity and the moisture and everything was going to give itself a life. And you can tell the difference between a piece that he had put on 10 years ago or 1 year ago, because it has some sort of life. That's the only way I can explain it, which I always found very interesting.
It's time for us to take a quick break. Henry, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the steel house and also at some point take a little deeper dive into P&R Surge and some of his inventions. I want to thank you for listening to us today. If you have a suggestion for a future guest on Archive West Texas, please send us an email. We're at info@classical1057.org. Thanks for listening. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. Today we're speaking with Henry Martinez. In our last segment, we talked about Henry's good friend and mentor, Robert Bruno, some of his background and how he came to Lubbock, and Henry was giving us some more detail on construction of the steel house out in Ransom Canyon. Henry, we were talking a little bit during the break, and I've got friends that knew Robert Bruno at the time he was building that house, and they talked about how pervasive art was in everything that Robert Bruno did. Said they'd go out there and visit him on a weekend. He'd be welding on the house, and he'd take a break, take him across the street to where he lived, and pull out some of his opera records and play them on what at the time was a really state-of-the-art stereo system, and just enjoy an opera or an aria of some sort. And you've mentioned that he was a perfectionist and that art was a focus even as he constructed this massive house out of steel. Tell us a little bit about how you saw that in his character and his life.
Well, Gordon, I always knew from conversation that when me and him would go out to have lunch, he would always invite me when things were okay. Okay, Henry, let's go have lunch. But he would visit with me about the churches that he would always go visit in Italy, in Rome, in Venice, where he saw art very important to to any community, and the churches that he would go see, that's the first thing that would catch his eye, is the beautiful work of art that was involved in the churches coming from the community, depending on what country he was in or what city. I mean, it was all different. And I would always see a lot of photos that he would show me about so many churches that he would go see. So from Gaudi to all kinds of different music, he would always try to instill to me the importance of music and art. Music, it was always classical. I was into rock and roll. I wanted to hear my Beatles and Led Zeppelin, but he would always tell me, that's not music. Music is Mozart and Beethoven, and of course, I was young at the time, and I was still a party animal, and I didn't care about Beethoven or Mozart. But now that I'm older, now I understand, because he was right. There's a difference between music and real music. So if you can compare that to art, it's the same thing. That's why I say he's a perfectionist, because from what he studied and what I've seen over the years, this was art. It was serious. And he took it to an extreme that I will never be able to understand, and I don't know if anybody else will. It's hard to explain, and I don't know if anybody will able to be explained, because you have a house that, to someone, they can call it the the 57, that looks like the top of the 57 Bel Air, or the Jetsons house, or a spaceship. The list goes on and on.
It's unique to Lubbock County, that's
but
for sure.
When you walk into this still house, outside or inside, you'll be shocked at what you see, and it's part of his art that he carried in his mind, I think, from seeing other things of, curvatures, and you got a little piece of 1 inch by 1 inch square, where you're thinking, why did he take the time to just put that 1 inch square on this big old piece of metal, when it could have been part of that piece? But it was part of his artistic mind, and it took time to cut out that little piece and put it in perfect. But those are the things that he would do, that, work on a piece for 6 months. If he didn't like it, he'd take it out and do it again. And he was a perfectionist.
Now, in doing some research on him, I ran across, apparently there's another house in Ransom Canyon built out of stone, maybe the Lawson House, that's
Yes,
designed in a manner after some of Gaudi's work, or
Yes, that is correct, Gordon. That house evolved around a conversation that him and Mark Lawson had about, you made a house made out of steel, how about you help me make one out of stone or rock? So Robert told him, sure, okay. So he helped him with the design of, that's a pretty well-known house too. Nothing but rock, stone per se, and it's a beautiful house inside and out also. But he had a lot to do with the design, and it does come from what you said, Gordon, from his study on churches, and the design is very close to what he's seen out there. It can't be exact, nothing can be exact, but yes, that is correct. He did have a lot to do with the design of that stone house that's also well known worldwide, just like the still house, yes.
So how much does that steel house weigh? Did you say?
The still house weighs, according to record, 110 tons of steel.
110 tons of steel?
110 tons of steel.
Where did he get the material?
The material was coming for that house, as far as I remember, it's always came from Jarvis Metal. And now he did get some wood from Brazil. I remember him showing me the pictures of the trees that were cut down of the wood that he was going to buy. It took me and a friend of mine that was my helper at PNR, it took me and him 2 days to unload 2 18-wheelers of this wood that he brought in. It wasn't planed, it wasn't cured, or I don't know what you call it, when they sand it down,
It was in its natural state.
It was in its natural state, exactly. And This was supposed to be for the wood flooring of the still house, but he wanted a blonde color, and the majority of this wood was not blonde color. This is how much of a perfectionist he was. I don't remember, and I can't give a figure of how much he spent for this wood, but he ended up probably using, I would say, maybe 10% of it for maybe the stairs of the still house. That was it. But the reason he didn't go with the rest of it is because it wasn't a blonde color like he thought it was going to be. It might have been blonde, but it changed. So he never pursued with that. Outside of that, the majority of the house is all steel, besides flooring of maybe some wood.
The windows, of course, are glass.
Now, the glass windows, all of those he designed and built, the frames and the glass. Him and my brother did those at PNR. For many years, they would put up the frames, or they would go make a pattern of the whole of the still house of where this window was going to go. Then they would put the pattern on one of the big tables that we have in 329, and they would build the frame and then cut out the glass, put it together, and then go out there and put it in themselves. So they're the ones that did all the glass, him and my brother.
It's time for another break, Henry. When we come
Yes, sir.
back, we'll finish up the description of the house and talk about where that property is today. I want to remind everybody again that all of our Archive West Texas episodes, including this show, are available on demand in our station app and also on our website at classical1057.org. Thanks again for listening. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We've been visiting with Henry Martinez about the construction of the steel house that Robert Bruno built out at Ransom Canyon back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So, Henry, you mentioned that when you're trying to help Dr. Bruno on the construction side, people might walk in viewing that house as just a normal construction site, but you said he very much viewed it as a work of art in progress. You mentioned his tendencies toward perfectionism. Tell us how long he worked on that house and what it was like to work with him on that house.
Well, Gordon, on the original plan that I ran across, over the years, I ran across a schematic, per se, of the still house. And he needed this by the city code, the area.
Had to have some sort of permit to build it.
Yeah, exactly. It was a permit. And the permit that I ran into for lot 11, block number 285, Canyon View Drive. It basically, all I'm saying is this draft, or it was an inspection draft, was dated November the 11th of 1974. So I'm going to say that he did start this house in 1974. He worked on this house for decades, up until, let's say, 2006, maybe 2007. He ran into a little bit of cancer, and it started to take him down. But it's safe to say that he worked on this house for 34 years. Then he concentrated more on P&R, and then also the still house.
So P&R was the business that you now own, and I guess that was named for the initials of his wife, and well, R was the Robert, P was the Patricia.
That is exactly correct.
And she worked at the High Plains Underground Water District. Give us the thumbnail sketch on P&R's
Of
genesis.
course. We'll go into P&R Search Systems, Inc. a little bit here, Gordon. The company started in 84, and when this company started, it started with Patricia Bruno was working for the High Plains Water District, and she brought up to Robert's attention that something needed to be done with our water in the irrigation sector, and if maybe he could come up with an idea about helping the farmers get a better distribution of water. So he took it upon himself and designed a T-valve with a controller, basically a timer that changes direction of water with the T-valve with a butterfly in the center. changes the water in direction right and left in increments to get a even distribution of water and a better crop. And of course, you keep all your important elements in your field, your fertilizer and your soil. So when he came up with this idea, they called it P for Patricia, and then R for Robert, PNR. And the fleur-de-lis symbol that's attached to the front part of the P is from France, and it's a symbol that is to help people, help the environment, the well-being of all, and it was very important to him to have that symbol. So that fleur-de-lis basically is saying that it's for the well-being of all. Okay, and that's a symbol that we treat with high respect, and that's why it's a part of the company.
How many millions of gallons of water do you think that device has saved over the decades?
Well, there was an article that I ran across of one of these documentaries that he's done on the still house, and the subject came up about PNR, and this was probably in the early 2000s, and at that time he gave a figure of 2 million gallons of water. For now, at 40 years, that's how long this business has been in. We're looking at quite a bit of water that we have saved. And it's not only the water that we're saving, we're cutting back to savings of 40% of water, and then the energy that it costs to run your wells, and your soil stays inside. Your crop is going to be much better.
You're getting a much better distribution of water
Exactly.
and a much higher yield on your crops.
Your yield is going to improve because the corn or the cotton or whatever it is that you're growing is going to be the same at the top end as it is on the bottom end because of the even distribution right and left to water. And it's very fundamental that if you keep your water inside a square, it's going to stay there instead of getting tailwater like we used to do in the past. And we can't afford to do that anymore. Without water, there's no life. He would always say that, and it's true.
Well, he's a remarkable individual, both as an artist, as a scholar, as a teacher, as an instructor, and also as an inventor and a business person.
To be someone out of high school with no college education, to compare me to a man like that is very difficult to understand the difference. You know, I mean, it was like a 180-degree circle of what he had been, of his knowledge and his artistic. But I learned a little, as much as I could while I was around him. I'm honored to have been around him, never going to forget him, and I share what I know about him as respect for him. That's it.
So the Steel House became perhaps even more famous after his passing. Talk us through some of the media groups that have come down to take photo shoots or to take a deeper dive on that.
Well, on the Still House, the Still House was by itself for about a year or two, and then it was brought up to my attention that if I could possibly help, because I was in town. So they asked me if I could help maybe give exposure about the Still House to begin with the university, and then if maybe I could do some shows for people who were asking if they could come see it. And so they basically asked me if I would be the curator, caretaker, whatever you want to call it. There's a term for it. But anyway, I was responsible for allowing people to visit, to do the upkeep, to make sure that the lawn still has to be taken care of, the taxes have to be paid, and the list goes on and on of what had to be done. So I assumed the responsibility with high respect, but I was given the opportunity to work with many, many different magazines. We had Vogue magazine, 12 magazine, we had the Texas Reporter, we had Texas Tech University would come just about every year. They would bring their students, 40 to 80 students of their architecture department, welding departments, and they had the opportunity to see something that could be an incentive for their education. If this man can do this, why can't I do something like this, per se? And, different countries. We had Brazil come in, we had Vietnam, we had China. The list goes on, Italy. It was just a fun thing to see the differences in the people's faces, something they've never seen before, didn't think it was possible. And I was so honored to give them the opportunity to see something they've never seen before.
Really appreciate you joining us today, Henry, to share your story and talk some about Robert Bruno. Fascinating, fascinating man, fascinating life, fascinating structure out there. Appreciate everyone listening today. If you know somebody whose story we should share, please email your suggestion to us at info@classical1057.org. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson. Please join us next time for another episode of Archive West Texas.